This is a 6-cylinder engine out of a 2005 Subaru Outback. It is the H6 EZ30, so it's a 3.0 liter engine. So let's do a deep dive trying to find the point of failure, which is suspected rod knock and oil consumption concerns. And we'll just go piece by piece to really get a better understanding of this engine as a whole. So let's get started. All right, so to begin on this engine, I'm going to start with tearing from the top down. So I'm going to remove all this cowling on the top, the intake manifold, and all the accessories and stuff on the top, and then we'll move our way down onto the inside. So let's get started. Engine cover off like so. And with that engine cover removed, you can see you have access to all the accessories, your AC compressor, your alternator, and your power steering pump, as well as your intake manifold, throttle body, and this is the piping that would go to your snorkel or your air box. Two 10mm bolts here. Next up is removing this intake manifold. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 on each side, so 8 bolts total with 12mm. And then 2 fuel lines on both sides, just use little rubber hoses. All right, now with the fuel lines disconnected on both sides, this intake manifold should come right up. So here's the general breakdown of the intake manifold to the engine. This is your throttle plate here. It is fly-by-wire, so it does run off the computer. You have a couple of cooling passages that comes in and out of this to keep this thing from coking up, which it does have a lot of carbon buildup in there. Not terrible, but it is there. These are some of your breather lines for your PCV system. And then obviously this is your fuel lines that actually route underneath the intake manifold itself, as well as your purge valve here. Very simple design on the intake manifold, all plastic runners. Fairly simple manifold on these engines. So next up, we're going to be disassembling all the engine accessories, such as your power steering, your alternator, and your AC compressor, as well as this idler pulley and this automatic tensioner. So we need to get this belt removed here. It's just your simple serpentine belt. The automatic tensioner is a 14mm on the pulley. So we can loosen that here, like so. And now with the belt removed, we can begin to start disassembling the accessories and pulleys. So 14mm on this idler. All right, next up, I'm going to remove this little bracket up here and a 10mm bolt right there. So then that's just the bracket that holds the harness that goes to your alternator on top. And also holds these 2 little bushings right here and here for that engine cover. Next up on the chopping block, I can get this alternator moved out of the way here. And this is just a 12mm bolt, through bolt. Now these alternators can be a little stubborn once in a while to take off because they have these bushings in the back and they can seize up actually with rust over time. They really don't like to pry out fairly easily. So that's another thing to remember is maybe to lube these up before you move them out. But now the alternator's off. Next up is going to be this AC compressor. Now you actually have 4 bolts, 1, 2, 3, and then 4 that hold it to the bracket itself. What I'm going to do is take off the bracket with the compressor together, which is just these 1, 2, a 3rd bolt on the front, and then a 4th bolt off to the side. So we're going to remove the bolts that way instead. So I'm going to remove the power steering pump the same way that I did for the AC compressor by this bracket here. As you can see, the bolts 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to disconnect this electrical connection here for the power steering switch. And this is off as well, just the 3 14mm bolts and the automatic tensioner is part of that assembly as well. So now that I have the engine accessories removed, you can kind of see how the harness is routed underneath. So you have a knock sensor here and you have a knock sensor here. That goes into your main harness. Now this goes back to your crankshaft sensor, ground strap here that we'll have to disconnect. Now moving to the back side of the cylinder head, we also have a solenoid on the back of the engine here and a oil pressure switch. Now you have a cam sensor on the top of the engine head. So now with the engine harness removed, I can kind of explain a little bit on top what I'm seeing here universally with the engine performance side of thing. The firing order is as follows: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now going down the line with sensors, you have your fuel injectors on the top side here. Be bank 1, you have a knock sensor bank 1, knock sensor bank 2. With the intake side on this engine, you have a variable valve timing solenoid as well as a solenoid in the back, your oil pressure switch for that corresponding solenoid. You have your 135 coil packs on both sides, are going to be the same style. Right here you have your crankshaft position sensor. Moving along, we have a coolant temp sensor kind of buried in right here because now you have a coolant port on the top side here and as well as a coolant port on the top side here. Delivering coolant with this crossover pipe on both sides, and this actually goes to the output of the heater core. Same thing on both sides, you have a cam sensor measuring the camshaft revolutions. So in terms of complexity with engine performance side of things, the engine management style sensors and everything are fairly self-explanatory. So next up on the list, we're going to be removing this front timing cover. This is a chain-driven engine, dual cam on both sides. So let's get this cover off and kind of going through the in-depth of what this looks like on the inside. So before I take this whole timing cover off, there is an important note here that this is a front cover and a back cover. And as you can see, you have different size fasteners throughout just because of the uniqueness of this cover. One thing to point out, the bolts will be different sizes throughout. So if you go to reassemble, you have to make sure they're in the correct position. Remove this crank pulley. It's a 22mm bolt. Now all these fasteners are a 5mm hex. All right, now with all the bolts out, we can begin to remove this timing cover in the front. So now with the timing cover disassembled, you can see that there's a chain set for each bank. So you have your front chain set here to bank 1, and then your rear chain set, bank 2. So both the intake gears have timing control on the actual gear set itself, and that's what these solenoids control. Forget, this is what I was talking about, the timing cover bolts. You have 3 different size bolts. There's the long ones, you have a medium sized bolt, and then these itty bitty ones, and obviously these were for that coolant crossover pipe. You're gonna better roll this thing over so it's timed out correctly. This needs to go 1 more revolution. Compression feels good in it. You have your dot here pointing up. Now these are actually timed with the colored chain links you can see there. And this is a hunting gear set, so these won't always match up. But you have a timing mark here, and a timing mark is there as well. Same thing on this cam, and right there if you can kind of see it. So all those timing marks line up with the gear sets, and all those timing marks can be found in the breakdown for these Subarus too. All right, so now let's get to continuing to rip this thing off. All right, now that I have all the chain sets removed, you can kind of see this back cover and the way they kind of isolate this thing where this pump cover has to come off. And then obviously your water pump and all that stuff has to come apart for it to come off, get separated. Then you can get access to removing these cylinder heads and get access to this crankshaft stuff to take apart. So that is next on the ticket. We're gonna take all these bolts off, and you can see they're numbered, you know, which way to torque them and everything. So lots and lots of bolts, more and more bolts to disassemble. So I'm gonna take these off quick, and we will get more in depth of this engine. So now that I got the rear timing cover off, you can see this engine a little better. Now I think a big design flaw on this personally is all these little O-rings. You know, they house little oil valleys and passages, as you can see in there. And they're on every little thing. So now if one of those little rubber O-rings fail, this is a long ways back to get to this part. So, you know, one simple little O-ring, and I've done a video on one of these before, a simple little O-ring can be a huge repair on these engines. Kind of a poor design in my opinion on this thing. I think next what I want to do is flip the engine over, and we'll try to get this lower and upper oil pan off, because I've never actually had one of those apart before. So we will roll the engine, remove this lower oil pan, And maybe at that point we might be able to see what the engine knocking was with the quote-unquote rod knock here. So I'm gonna roll the engine, and I will keep working on disassembling this lower oil pan. And if there's anything that sticks out that's important, I will share that. All right, now with the engine flipped over, you can see this is the exhaust port on the bottom side here. So I'm gonna have to remove these 2 engine mounts, 1 and 2. This lower oil pan will probably have to be removed. And then you got a bunch of hex style bolts holding this lower oil pan on. But I will get this disassembled, and we will look on the inside. And like I said, maybe we can see that quote unquote rod noise, bad bearing, you name it. All right, now that I got this lower oil pan off, you can see these were not long for the world here. This O-ring was actually crushed in there. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't know if this has ever been apart before or what the deal was, but look at that. And it's feeling fairly brittle, but it was just squished in there. I'm surprised that didn't leak, or didn't create a leak. Yeah, these O-rings are pretty brittle. Either way, there's oils returns are right through here. This is actually your coolant crossover, so this attaches to the lower pan here. And as you can see, this is actually a pipe underneath through the pan, through the molding, to this other side. So coolant can pass through side to side on that's delivery to the cylinder heads itself. You can get a good look at the rods down in here now. I can't really tell. I mean, some of these feel a little loose side to side. I haven't really pried on them, but I think we'll have to probably disassemble some more goodness here to really get a good visual at these rods. I think next step up here is ripping the bank 1 and bank 2 cylinder heads off this thing. So now that I got this side cylinder head off, as luck would have it, if that's what you would call it, this back cylinder here is the culprit. This bearing right here, as you can see it, moves quite a bit. So that is the problem child. Rod bearing is faulty on that. I'm unsure on this side yet. We still have that cylinder head on, the plugs are in. I did try pushing on them, but I don't know if I'm fighting a little compression or if they're actually fine. But I'll get this head off and we will inspect this side, and then let's split the case and really get an inspection on this rod and see what happened there. All right, now with this cylinder head removed, this side is actually, it all feels fairly good if I sit there and pull and pry on these rods, and the bearings must be decent on this side for the most part in terms of play. There might be some pitting and stuff like that that we'll see. Overall, we'll have to split this case. You can see there's 2 halves of these cases here, and I've never had a style like this apart. So this is going to be an interesting thing. I'm believing that to get to the wrist pans, you have to take these plugs out, and then all these bolts along here, as well as in these coolant passages. You can kind of see them in there. Those all have to be removed as well. And then you can get the crankshaft out. So I'm going to get those bolts out. We will get this thing separated, and then we'll get those bearings off of the pistons and, the rods, and see what that's all about. Here's another bizarre thing. Loosening these bolts up, there's like airlocked in the bolts from, I don't know, the factory. See it's sizzling? See if I can get this side to do it, since there's still a little coolant in the bottom of this thing. Hey. Oh, there it goes. Cool. Yeah, look at it. It's like airlocked or something. Weird style engines, you know? All right, so now I have this case half split open and I was able to get the crankshaft out. We did find our problem. Cylinder 6, I was kind of showing you that knocking noise. This is the bearing. It is very, very thin. You can tell it got hot. I mean, it even squished it flat out. If you can kind of see that from the video, it oblonged it. And that's from the thing probably hammering back and forth as it was idling and running. Side 2, look at that, it just flattened it right out. And I believe this thing had a bit of an oil starvation issue towards the end. You can see the rod portion of the crankshaft right here. It definitely took some wear. So yeah, this crankshaft is probably, would need to be machined, and it's probably not long for this world, to be honest. But that's an oil starvation issue. Now these engines, man, they're not easy to go together or apart. And you got quite a bit of stuff that you have to disassemble. Why don't I disconnect these other rods quickly and maybe just look at the crankshaft as a whole. All right, now you can see I got the rest of these rods off and these caps. They definitely had wear too. Look at the inside of this one. That wasn't long for this world either. You can kind of see all of them. So definitely an oil starvation issue. I don't know if the pump was starting to fail or what the story exactly was here, what caused this. But now that you can see there's some hot spotting. This is that one cap on the very back. You can see that definitely got hot. Yeah, there's another part of the bearing on the rods. So definitely bad rod bearings on this unit. For the most part, I just see really damage to this journal on the crank, but it would probably be, in my guess, all of it's going to be out of tolerance, even if you put new bearings in this thing. So you'd have to go oversized, which, again, seeing what these cars go for, they're no value. They're not desirable vehicles, I guess, in terms of value. So this thing really isn't worth sticking the extra coin into. Now the main bearings, here's a thrust. I'll see if I pop one out. The main bearings don't look terrible, so that is a good thing. Yeah, I got material everywhere. That must be from the rod just going everywhere. So yeah, it's probably not a good thing to keep around. I guess there's probably a bunch of bearing material and debris now throughout the engine. There might be a few salvageable parts on this thing, but overall, these bearings for the mains don't look terrible. But again, being that the rods really took a beating from the oil starvation, it's kind of a hard gamble to sink the kind of money into this thing. So you can see this is being a boxer too. You can see the skirt wear on this, and that's a pretty common thing just from sitting against the engine like that. If you look into the oil control ring, I don't know if you can see that, but it's got a ton of carbon buildup in there, and that ring is kind of stuck inside. You see these compression rings can move out. This one's actually looks like it's kind of held in place with a little extra carbon. Look at that. I mean, some of those fins you can't even look through. Here's another one, skirt wear. Yeah, look at the rod wear on this thing. Another one that just got hot in the back. This is the other bank now. Still a lot of skirt wear. That's just kind of the MO. 200,000 miles on this thing. Look at that ring lanyard. That thing's like squished down. This was going to be this definitely burned oil for quite some time. last but not least, you got the last two pistons, both of the same thing. Bunch of wear and the carbon buildup in the oil control ring. Now, it's kind of hard to really get a good visual in there, but most of the stuff looks fairly clean. If you can look in this back one, there's quite a bit of carbon down in there, but still looks like the oil will be able to travel decently through that. Well, there you have it. I think this one's not going to be worth doing much to unless it's a full rebuild, which I don't think there's a lot of parts available for these engines other than some really third-party stuff or directly from Subaru, which probably is the demise, which is the sad part with most of these engines, is sometimes the value of these engines costs too much to rebuild, especially with cars that don't really hold their value or have any sentimental issue per se. So there you have it, the EZ30 completely torn down. Let me know if I missed a lot, which I probably did. I don't know if there's stuff that you guys would like to hear, like me to try to show. Again, this is the first time I've torn down a EZ30 down this far, so quite a cool thing, quite a cool assembly. A lot of stuff going on, a lot of different size parts, different size fasteners that really should be kept in order. So if you guys are tearing these things apart, just do your homework, do your due diligence, and make sure everything's going exactly back to where it's supposed to be going. So again, if anybody's looking for parts for one of these things, I'm gonna just throw a few things on eBay, but if you guys are looking for parts in particular for this engine, there was still some good stuff on here. Again, like these block halves and stuff like that. I don't think there's many issues with them. You know, so it could be cleaned and reused. If somebody is trying to rebuild something like this and needs some donor parts, hit me up. So thanks again for watching. Appreciate it.